Well, the main thing that essay tries to answer is why students eat so many Pop-Tarts. And this came from students' time and food logs, an assignment where they have to keep track of where their time goes and what food they eat for a couple of days. And the most prevalent, consistent sort of packaged food item was Pop-Tarts for breakfast. And so my main question was, why are students eating so many Pop-Tarts? And then as I looked into that more, it became, are their assumptions about Pop-Tarts right? Are they, when they assume they are getting these things they say they like, convenience, low cost, speed, portability, all those things that they like about Pop-Tarts, taste, are they really getting those things? So that's kind of where I wound up going with the essay, is what assumptions students make about Pop-Tarts. Well, my perspective, I've come to be an instructor as an interdisciplinary studies instructor. What we tend to do is try to look at areas that don't fit neatly into any one discipline. For example, with food, students and others might assume that, well, that's health and human services and nutrition, but that's merely one very small thread in the world of food. There's all kinds of components to food, including economics, all kinds of cultural study, gender. There's all kinds of things that go into food. So my own perspective or point of view on the essay was as a person who tries to look at food from an interdisciplinary perspective. But I do have some biases. One being is, I am, I guess by most people's standards, would be considered kind of a health nut. However you want to. Usually people have a set of assumptions about what that means, but I try to eat food that is as close to its natural state as possible. I'm not a hardcore naturalist or a natural food vegan or anything like that, but my fundamental question is, if I'm eating this food and it has a label, why does it need a label? That's really my first question. My second question in regards to food is, will this food decompose within the next couple of weeks if left on its own? And if the answer to that question is no, is it actually food by my own definition? And so I guess my assumption is, at least in my point of view, I don't know if it's an assumption, but my point of view is food is a lot more complicated than nutrient components. And my perspective is that label doesn't mean nearly as much as, will this food break down and is it actually food by my sort of complicated interdisciplinary definition. So my assumptions tend to go against what the food label is actually even telling me. The information contained in a food label doesn't necessarily tell me what I want to know about food. So I guess on that end is, I don't know if you'd call me a naturalist. I eat plenty of things that aren't natural, I guess, but by my own definition, I break those rules, so I'm not militant about it. But generally, that's where I'm coming from when I look at food. So that's my own point of view as the instructor, and as someone who studies food history and food policy and food behaviors. Those are my own assumptions, I guess, and point of view for the essay. Well, the main implication, I think, for someone who reads this essay is I don't want them to ever be able to assume that their food label is giving them accurate information. That's one. And also want another implication to be for them to ask that question I just mentioned is, why does this food need a label? And in fact, that what people assume when they read a food label is that this is A, accurate information, and B, that it's relevant information. And a lot of times I think the information on that food label is actually designed to misinform consumers and not inform consumers. One quick example is that, in the essay, 0 does not mean 0 on a food label. 0 means whatever the combination of food lobbyists and policy writers say zero means on a food label. And in the case of something like saturated fat or trans fat, it could say zero, but in actuality, that just means less than 0.05 grams of trans fat per serving. So in response, what food companies sometimes do is just increase the number of serving sizes until it drives down that value under 0.5, and then they can put zero trans fat on their food label, which is actually not true, because if the ingredients say partially hydrogenated oil or any sort of fat, then it has trans fat. It doesn't matter if the label says zero or not. Yeah, I mean, and food for me as a teacher of interdisciplinary study, if I could take that point of view, and not so much as a food person, but as a teacher, the reason I think food works well as critical thinking content is that if you start to see these hidden things about your food, it starts to lift that veil about what else in the world is being hidden from me. And by asking these sorts of questions that we address in the essay, understanding, where is this information coming from? Understanding the purpose of a food label, whether it's to inform or misinform. Am I asking the right questions? Are there concepts I don't understand or are unclear, sometimes on purpose, from some other outside source? If we begin to ask those kinds of questions about all kinds of things, our education, our careers, our relationships, our political or religious beliefs, or any of those things, it isn't to tear those things down. It's to figure out why we believe those things, and are we thinking about these things in a logical and complete, or at least as complete as we can get as individuals in that kind of way? Are we asking good questions and thinking in such a way that does open us up to various viewpoints in order to see a more complete picture of Pop-Tarts or our own political persuasions or whatever.